looked like just a sandwich, but the message was loud and clear. When Marcus Reynolds received a moldy sandwich on his first-class tray, he didn't react with anger. He simply looked at the flight attendant, Claire, whose faint smirk said more than words ever could. She thought she knew who belonged up here. She thought Marcus didn't. What she didn't know was that the man she'd just slighted wasn't just a first-class passenger. He was one of the silent partners behind Elite Airways. And the button he pressed? It wasn't just for service. It activated the private surveillance system he'd helped fund. Behind the scenes, her quiet comments about how people like him didn't belong in first class were captured perfectly, word for word. Before we dive deeper, let us know where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story only gets more unbelievable from here. Marcus adjusted the sleeve of his custom suit as he took seat 2A on Flight 347 to San Francisco. The soft leather felt familiar, a reward earned after 20 years building Reynolds Technologies from scratch. As others boarded, he casually reviewed the latest financial reports for the airline he partly owned, anonymously. The cabin buzzed with welcomes and champagne flutes. A white-haired gentleman across the aisle got a warm greeting and a glass of signature champagne. But when Claire approached Marcus, her tone changed. "Hot towel?" she asked flatly, eyes not quite meeting his. He accepted it with grace. No need to react. He'd seen this before. But when the same flight attendant became all smiles again for the passenger right behind him, Marcus noticed. His pre-ordered drink, a rare whiskey he always requested, never came. 10 minutes passed. Others who boarded after him were sipping theirs. So, he tapped the call button. Claire returned with a tight smile. "I believe I'm still waiting for my Malin 18, Marcus said calmly. "Oh, that's not in our system," she replied. "We're short on premium drinks today. I can offer water or juice instead." He showed her the confirmation email. Still, she dismissed it. The system sometimes overbooks. Then she walked away, whispering something to another attendant, who glanced at Marcus and laughed. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply opened his tablet, typed a short message to his executive assistant. "Experiencing odd service on Elite Flight 347. Might be worth discussing with HR." As the captain announced takeoff, Claire walked past him again. This time, she handed him a small pack of economy-class pretzels, while every other first-class passenger got warm mixed nuts. Marcus stared at the package for a long moment. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. And what came next? It wouldn't be loud. It would be quiet and devastating. As the plane rolled toward takeoff, one message changed everything. Marcus reopened his tablet and quietly messaged his assistant, Jessica. "On second thought, contact Diane now. I want to know, have there been other service issues in first class involving minority passengers this quarter? Also, when exactly was the new cabin surveillance installed?" Her reply came fast. "System's been active across the fleet for 3 months. All footage stored for 30 days. Should I be worried?" Marcus glanced toward the front galley, where 2 flight attendants whispered behind the curtain, followed by a burst of laughter. "Not yet," he typed, "but keep your phone close. I might need a few calls made before we land." As the plane ascended smoothly into the sky, what should have been a routine flight to San Francisco was quickly turning into a quiet test of patience, professionalism, and principle. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Crew began service. Marcus leaned back briefly, remembering the boardroom where it all started, when he proposed a large, quiet investment into Elite Airways. Many questioned the decision, but he'd seen potential, not just for profits, but for change. Real change. The kind that starts quietly and is backed by data, leadership, and perspective. That's why he'd insisted on seeing things from the passenger's point of view. And today, what he saw couldn't be ignored. Jessica's next message lit up his screen. HR shows 17 official complaints from minority passengers in first class over the past year. 5 mention the same attendant, Claire Wilson. 3 were closed for insufficient evidence. 2 got voucher offers. No disciplinary action. Surveillance on your aircraft is fully operational. Diane is ready for your call. Marcus didn't reply. He just nodded slightly to himself and slipped the tablet into his jacket pocket as Claire re-entered the cabin, now rolling the meal cart with a polished smile. "Mr. Whitman," she said cheerfully to the silver-haired gentleman across the aisle, "your special request, seared salmon, truffle risotto, and a glass of Montrachet. Compliments from the chef." Marcus observed the presentation, the fine china, the wine pairing, the genuine care in her voice. He noticed how she warmly remembered another passenger's bread preference, how she leaned in to describe flavors and textures like a host in a 5-star restaurant. But when she arrived at his seat, something shifted. Without meeting his eyes, she placed a covered dish in front of him. "Your meal," she said quickly, already turning to go. Marcus lifted the lid. What he saw made nearby passengers glance over. A dry sandwich, bread clearly stale, no garnishing, a small warmish cup of apple juice next to it. "Excuse me," Marcus said calmly, his tone cutting through the quiet. "There seems to be a mistake. I pre-ordered the chef's special when I booked this flight." Claire turned, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't have a record of that. We're serving what's available today." Marcus held up his phone. "Here's the confirmation email, including my meal preference and a system acknowledgement." Claire barely looked. "As I mentioned with your drink earlier, sometimes the system overbooks. There isn't always enough premium service for everyone." Across the aisle, Mr. Whitman paused mid-bite. He wasn't the only one watching. Marcus gestured subtly to the surrounding meals. "That's interesting. I see plenty of chef's plates being served. Why am I the only one receiving a sandwich?" Claire's smile grew tighter. "We prioritize based on loyalty program status. I'm a Platinum Elite member," Marcus replied evenly. "Over 200,000 miles flown this year." "I'll check with my supervisor," Claire said curtly, her voice making it clear she wouldn't. Then she vanished behind the curtain. Marcus sat still. He didn't touch the sandwich. He didn't reach for the juice. He simply breathed and assessed. 20 years in the boardrooms of corporate America had taught him many things, including when to let things go and when to hold the line. And this time, this wasn't just about a sandwich. This was about something much bigger. For the 17 passengers who filed complaints, and the many more who quietly endured, Marcus pressed the call button again. No answer. Minutes passed. Eventually, a younger flight attendant approached. His name tag read, "Michael." "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone anything but welcoming. "Yes," Marcus responded with measured professionalism. "I'd like to speak with the purser or lead attendant regarding an issue with my meal." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. "Claire is managing this cabin. What's the issue?" "I pre-ordered a premium meal," Marcus explained, aware that more passengers were now watching. "Instead, I received what looks like an economy class option. When I asked, I was told some guests were being prioritized, despite my Platinum Elite status." Michael's reply was clipped. "Sir, sometimes adjustments are necessary mid-flight. I'm sure Claire explained this to you." Marcus nodded slowly and took note of Michael's badge number. "I understand adjustments. What I don't understand is why everyone else around me received what they ordered, and I did not." He held up the sandwich, its edges visibly curling with dryness. "Can you explain the criteria behind those adjustments?" Michael's posture shifted. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing the other guests." Marcus hadn't raised his voice, not once, but now the silence in first class had a different edge. Passengers glanced over. Some looked away. Others didn't. "I haven't raised my voice," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm asking a simple question and not getting an answer." Behind Michael, Claire reappeared. She leaned in, whispered something, and the two disappeared behind the galley curtain. Through a gap, Marcus could see them speaking with a third crew member. Occasionally, one of them glanced toward him. He reached for his phone and found the contact info for Diane Chen, head of HR at Elite Airways. As he began typing a message summarizing the incident, a quiet presence appeared beside him. "Mr. Whitman," The silver-haired gentleman from across the aisle stood holding his half-finished meal. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said, voice lowered. "I've flown this route for 15 years. Never seen anything like this. It's not right. Want me to say something?" Marcus gave a small nod of appreciation, but declined. "Thank you, I've got it." He resumed typing as the murmurs behind the curtain continued, unaware they were being silently documented by the very person they'd misjudged. When Marcus finally looked back at the sandwich, something caught his eye. He lifted the top slice gently and froze. A faint green haze had spread along the edge. Underneath, small dark spots dotted the bread. Moldavian. He calmly placed the bread back down and pushed the plate aside. Whatever this was, it wasn't just oversight. It was personal. Michael returned a moment later, his tone slightly theatrical. "Everything all right with your meal, sir?" "No," Marcus replied firmly, pointing to the sandwich. "There's visible mold on the bread. I'd like to speak with the captain." Michael leaned in, examining the sandwich as though it were a riddle. I don't see anything out of the ordinary. Maybe you're mistaken." "I'm not," Marcus said, steady. "This bread is clearly spoiled, and I'd like to know why it was served to me when the rest of this cabin received fresh plated meals." Before he could respond, Claire appeared at his side. Her expression was no longer neutral. "Is there a problem again?" she asked, her tone sharper than before. "Yes," Marcus replied. "I've received a spoiled meal. I've asked for clarification multiple times, and I've been met only with avoidance and denial." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Sir, if you don't like what you've been served, you don't have to eat it, but I won't tolerate baseless accusations." "Baseless?" Marcus echoed, gesturing toward the sandwich. "That's mold. That's not subjective. I've asked respectfully, repeatedly. Why is this how I'm being treated?" Claire muttered just loud enough for him and a few nearby passengers to hear. Some people never stop expecting special treatment. The silence that followed was heavy, not because it was quiet, but because everyone understood exactly what had just been said. A heavy silence settled over first class. Some passengers stared at their screens, pretending not to hear. Others exchanged glances, the kind that said they knew exactly what was happening. Marcus could feel his pulse rising, but experience had taught him. Composure was power. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he said calmly, meeting Claire's eyes. "Just equal treatment. The same respect, the same service, the same dignity given to every other first-class passenger." For a brief moment, the polished mask on Claire's face slipped. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Look," she hissed. "I don't know how you got into this cabin, but we both know you don't belong here. So maybe just sit down and be thankful you're not back in economy." Before Marcus could respond, Michael stepped in. He'd noticed something the crew hadn't. Several passengers had their phones raised, recording. "That's enough, Claire," Michael said. "Let's step into the galley." The two attendants vanished behind the curtain. Marcus exhaled. The moment he'd anticipated had finally come. It wasn't subtle anymore. The intent was loud and clear. He picked up his phone and opened the secure Elite Airways Executive app, a platform only accessible to senior board members and high-level investors. With a few taps, he activated the live cabin feed. The system was recording every word, every whisper. From behind the curtain, voices filtered through. "I cannot believe these people," Claire said, her voice unmistakable during a lull in the ambient noise. "He probably got up here with points or some program. Did you see how he was dressed? Walking around like he runs the place?" Marcus's finger hovered over the record and flag option in the app. He didn't press it yet. Part of him wanted to see how far it would go, but the decision was made for him when the galley curtain opened again. A third crew member appeared, the purser. Her uniform and demeanor marked her as the senior in-flight authority. "Mr. Reynolds?" she began, her tone clipped but formal. "I understand there's been some confusion with your meal. Please know that we take all guest concerns very seriously." Marcus noted the sudden use of his name. Someone had clearly checked the manifest. "Thank you," he replied. "As I told your colleagues, I ordered a premium meal. What I received was a visibly spoiled substitute. I'm also aware of what was said behind that curtain." The purser maintained her corporate expression. "We're reviewing the issue. In the meantime, I can offer you a business class option from the menu." Marcus looked at her. "What's more concerning than the downgraded meal is that one of your crew members made a very specific comment, one that suggests this wasn't a simple mistake." The purser faltered for the first time. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Claire is one of our most experienced attendants." "Experience," Marcus replied softly, "doesn't mean impartiality. Sometimes it just means they've had more time to perfect the act." Before she could respond, the overhead speakers crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "This is your captain speaking. I've been informed of an issue in the first-class cabin. I want to remind all guests that crew instructions must be followed at all times. Any behavior that disrupts service or affects safety will not be tolerated." It was clear what the announcement implied. The captain had been told Marcus was the problem. Around him, passengers turned, some with concern, others with suspicion. The story was being rewritten right there in the air. The purser stood taller, emboldened. "Mr. Reynolds, we need you to accept the current situation. We're doing our best to accommodate everyone." Marcus met her gaze. "Can you point to one thing I've done that could be called disruptive?" "You've continued to question our procedures," she replied sharply. "That can escalate tension in the cabin. I must ask you to let this go." That's when Marcus noticed movement. Mr. Whitman, the gentleman from across the aisle, had stood again, and this time he walked straight toward the purser. "Excuse me," Whitman said, voice calm but firm. "I've been watching this whole exchange. This man has done nothing wrong. He's been polite while being served spoiled food and treated with visible disrespect." The atmosphere in first class had shifted. When Mr. Whitman stood up and spoke, his voice rang with quiet conviction. "I've flown elite for over 20 years, he said, facing the purser, "and I've never seen anything like this. What I see here isn't confusion. It's discrimination." A murmur of agreement swept through the cabin. Heads turned, expressions hardened. People were no longer ignoring what they saw. The purser's posture stiffened. She realized she no longer controlled the narrative. "We'll bring you something from the business class menu right away, Mr. Reynolds," she said quickly, retreating toward the galley. "That won't be necessary," Marcus replied, his voice calm but firm. "What is necessary is an explanation. Why am I being treated differently than every other passenger in this cabin?" She froze, clearly unsettled by the direct challenge. Before she could speak, the curtain opened again, and this time the captain stepped into the cabin. His uniform was crisp, his presence commanding, his expression unmistakably hostile. "Sir," the captain began, addressing Marcus without introducing himself, "I've been informed that you're causing a disturbance. If this continues, I'll have no choice but to divert the aircraft." The threat was clear and public. Marcus didn't flinch. He calmly reached for his tablet and opened his executive email interface. "Captain Hoffman," he said, looking up, "I suggest you reconsider. I haven't caused a disturbance. I've asked questions supported by witnesses. What I haven't done is raise my voice, violate safety instructions, or behave inappropriately." The captain's expression hardened. "As the person in command, I decide what qualifies as disruptive behavior. This is your final opportunity to comply with crew directives." "What specific directive have I failed to comply with?" Marcus asked, his finger hovering over the send button on an email addressed directly to the airline's board of directors, the same board he'd helped appoint. For a moment, the captain hesitated. The purser stepped forward and whispered something quietly into his ear. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. Marcus saw it and leaned in. "This isn't about compliance," he said. "It's about being treated with the same respect every passenger here expects. The disruption didn't start with me. It started with discriminatory treatment from your crew." A sharp ache pulsed behind Marcus's eyes, but he didn't look away. Neither did the captain. Behind them, the cabin had gone still. Passengers weren't pretending anymore. They were listening, watching, recording. And in that stillness, Marcus weighed his options. He could step back, let it go, accept the excuse, the silence, the subtle rewriting of truth, like he had so many times before when staying quiet felt like survival. But not this time, not after what had been said, not with passengers listening, not with cameras running. This wasn't about one spoiled meal. It was about a system that allowed moments like this to be minimized, erased, or blamed on the wrong person. "Captain Hoffman," Marcus said at last, his voice steady and unmistakably strong, "before you take an action that impacts every person on this flight, there's something you need to understand." "I've made my decision," the captain interrupted sharply. "This is my aircraft. I won't tolerate any challenges to my crew's authority." Marcus nodded slowly, his finger hovering. "That," he said, "is exactly the problem." He held the captain's stare. "You've made a decision without asking a single question. You're prepared to inconvenience hundreds of passengers, not because of anything I've done, but because you never paused to ask what actually happened." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Sir, this is your final warning." And the entire cabin waited to see what Marcus would do next. "Immediately, or I will be forced to declare an emergency and divert this flight." The captain's voice was sharp, final, but Marcus didn't flinch. "And which instruction would you like me to comply with exactly?" he asked evenly. "So far, I've been told to accept spoiled food, to be grateful for being mistreated, and to remain silent in the face of obvious bias. Which of those, Captain, do you believe is a lawful order?" For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Captain Hoffman's face, but it was gone in a second, replaced by rigid control. "This isn't about race," he snapped. "It's about keeping order in my cabin." "It became about race," Marcus replied calmly, "the moment your flight attendant decided I didn't belong in first class. It became about race when I was served visibly spoiled food while others enjoyed chef-prepared meals. And it certainly became about race when your crew made specific comments about my presence in this cabin." Behind the captain, Claire had reappeared from the galley, her face flushed with a mix of panic and frustration. "Captain, perhaps we should—" "Mr. Reynolds is correct," came a voice from the aisle. It was Mr. Whitman again, calm, unshaken, standing beside Marcus now. "I witnessed the entire interaction," he said, voice steady. "And so did many others here." The flight attendant made comments that were completely out of line. This gentleman was served moldy food, deliberately. If you divert this flight, you'll be doing so to punish a passenger for calmly insisting on basic respect. The murmur of voices grew, no longer whispers, but agreement. Across the aisle, a woman held up her phone. I recorded what was said. You can hear her clearly saying he didn't belong here, even though he has platinum status. Captain Hoffman's authority was slipping, visibly. His eyes darted between passengers, between witnesses. "Captain," Marcus said, seizing the shift, "I'm giving you the opportunity to resolve this professionally. You can acknowledge what's happened and take action to correct it, or you can escalate it without cause and face the consequences that follow." The words hung in the air, calm, factual, but powerful. The captain said nothing. Behind him, Claire disappeared once more into the galley. Urgent whispers followed. Marcus kept his gaze locked on the captain. The moment was fragile, yet defining. Backing down now would validate everything he had fought against, not just here, but throughout his entire career. He took a breath, tapped his screen, and pressed send. The soft chime of confirmation echoed in the hushed cabin. "I've just contacted the airline's executive leadership," he said aloud. "They've received a formal report and a request to review the surveillance footage from this cabin. Footage which, I should note, includes the conversations that occurred behind that curtain. The captain's face stiffened. There are no surveillance cameras in this cabin. Actually, there are, Marcus corrected, his tone precise. They were installed 3 months ago as part of the updated premium service policy. Every interaction for the past hour has been recorded, including everything said in the galley. The color drained from the captain's face. Behind the curtain, Claire's voice could be heard rising. Though the words were lost in the aircraft's hum, her panic was unmistakable. The captain's hand twitched toward his comm device, but he hesitated. "Captain," Marcus continued, voice calm, measured but unmistakably in control. "I understand you're in a difficult position. Your crew gave you incomplete and misleading information. You've tried to maintain order, but the facts of this situation are now public, witnessed, and documented." The silence in the cabin deepened. Every passenger was watching. No one looked away. "The question now," Marcus said, "is how you choose to move forward." Suddenly, the intercom crackled. A new voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer. We're currently experiencing some minor technical issues. We ask that you remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Cabin service will resume shortly." The meaning wasn't lost on anyone. This flight would not be diverted. Not today. "We'll be landing in Denver in approximately 50 minutes. The captain's voice, now coded in forced professionalism, echoed through the cabin. Passengers stirred in their seats. Eyes glanced at Marcus. A few checked their watches. Others whispered, confused. Marcus didn't move. He understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't about a technical issue. It was an attempt to remove him quietly, without admitting fault. The captain had chosen escalation over truth, and Marcus wasn't surprised. The purser approached again, more cautiously this time. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her tone no longer authoritative, "we'll bring you a proper meal right away from business class." Marcus looked up, his voice steady. "This isn't about the food anymore. It's about accountability." She hesitated. "I assure you, sir, Elite Airways has strict policies against discrimination." Marcus met her eyes. 17 formal complaints in the past year, 5 naming Claire Wilson, 3 dismissed, 2 silenced with vouchers, no action taken. That's not an isolated incident, that's a pattern. The purser took a step back, realizing this wasn't just a passenger. This was someone who knew the system, and who had the reach to change it. Behind the curtain, Claire's voice trembled through the hum of dissent. "How did he know about the cameras? Nobody told us there were cameras." She was no longer in control, and she knew it. Marcus tapped out a message to his assistant. "Denver landing confirmed. Full intervention. Diane's team should meet the aircraft. Confirm surveillance access. Captain is diverting to remove me." The reply came instantly. "Already in motion. HR, legal, and ops will be at Gate B17. CEO notified." Marcus set his device down. Outside the window, the ground drew closer. Inside the cabin, silence returned. But it wasn't peace, it was tension. The kind that sits between injustice and consequence. The diversion had now affected everyone on board, from business travelers missing meetings to families worried about missed connections. A quiet ripple had become a wave, and as the plane descended, Marcus sat still, composed but resolute. This hadn't started with a confrontation. It had started with a sandwich, but what it revealed was much larger. Moments like this don't just test patience, they reveal systems. And sometimes it takes a single voice in seat 2A to shake the whole structure. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The captain's voice cracked through the intercom again, still calm, but now unmistakably strained. Through the gap in the galley curtain, Marcus could see Claire and Michael in hurried conversation. Their movements were tight, clipped. Claire's gestures were frantic. Michael's face darkened as he checked his phone. Marcus didn't need to hear them. He knew exactly what was being said. A quiet chime from his tablet drew his eyes. A new message from Jessica had arrived. "Surveillance audio recovered. Transcript attached." Marcus opened the file, and what he read confirmed everything he already knew, only now in writing. "Claire, I can't believe this is happening. Who does he think he is? Michael, I told you we should have just given him the regular meal. Claire, why? So he can act like he owns the place? These people need to stay in their lane. Michael, keep your voice down. Claire, what? I'm saying what we're all thinking. First, they want coach. Now they want first class. Next, they'll want to fly the plane. Then came the captain's voice. Captain Hoffman, what's the situation? Claire, that passenger in 2A is being disruptive, making others uncomfortable. Captain, how exactly? Claire, he's complaining, accusing us. A few passengers have concerns. Michael, he's been confrontational. Captain, has he violated safety protocol? Threatened anyone? Claire, not exactly, but he's the type who always plays the race card. Captain, I see. Let me handle it. If he doesn't cooperate, we'll divert. Marcus closed the file. Even when you expect it, seeing it spelled out so plainly still stings. This wasn't misunderstanding. It wasn't poor service. It was targeted, coordinated, personal. Across the aisle, Mr. Whitman leaned in. You seem remarkably calm, he murmured, almost like you expected this. Marcus allowed a small smile. In my line of work, you learn to prepare for contingency plans. Whitman studied him. Technology, strategy, banking, Reynolds Technologies. Recognition lit in Whitman's eyes. You're Marcus Reynolds. Your firm handled half the Fortune 500's digital architecture. Marcus gave a nod. Whitman's face shifted to admiration. Then I'd say Captain Hoffman just made a very serious miscalculation. Before Marcus could reply, the plane jolted onto the Denver tarmac. No applause, no announcements of welcome, just the sound of reverse thrust and tightening silence. Then the captain spoke again, without the usual gratitude. All passengers, please remain seated until further instruction for security reasons. Marcus's phone vibrated. A direct call from Jessica. Marcus, are you okay? I'm fine, he answered. What's happening on the ground? Diane's at the gate with the full team. Airport security's been briefed. They understand this is an internal issue. They're standing down. Legal reviewed the audio. The board has it. And? The chairman called an emergency session for tomorrow morning, but he's already cleared you to act now. His words, clean house if you have to. Marcus nodded, the weight of leadership settling fully onto his shoulders. What started as one insult, one sandwich, had become something far more profound. This wasn't about a flight anymore. This was about what a company tolerates when it thinks no one's watching. And what happens when someone is? The plane rolled to a stop at the gate, but no one stood. No one opened overhead bins. The cabin sat in full, silent awareness, not of a delay, but of a reckoning. Marcus folded his hands. Ready. Because this wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what had to happen next. Captain Hoffman stepped out of the cockpit. His uniform was crisp, but his expression betrayed the storm beneath. As he walked down the aisle toward Marcus, the cabin went still. Mr. Reynolds, he began, his voice carefully neutral, I'm going to need you to deplane first. There are representatives waiting at the gate to speak with you. Marcus met his eyes without flinching. I'm aware, Captain, but before I leave, I'd like to know, on the record, why this flight was diverted. A muscle in the captain's jaw tensed. As I said, we're addressing a technical concern. Marcus didn't blink. And what concern would that be exactly? Because it seems to have developed right after I raised concerns about discriminatory behavior from your crew. The captain's gaze flicked to the rows of passengers, all now listening intently. Sir, this isn't the place for that discussion. I think it's exactly the place, Marcus countered, gesturing to the cabin. Every person here has had their travel plans disrupted. Don't they deserve to know the truth? Was there a real issue with this aircraft? Or was the real issue me? The question hung in the air, undeniable. Several passengers leaned forward. Whispers spread. Some were already filming. Captain Hoffman hesitated. I made a decision based on the information available to me at the time. What information? Marcus asked again, his voice steady. That a black passenger asked for the same meal and the same respect as everyone else? Or was it the false narrative that I somehow didn't belong up here? The murmurs swelled. The cabin felt electric. The captain flushed. This conversation is over. Security will escort you off the plane. But as the door opened, it wasn't airport police who stepped in. It was Diane Chen, dressed sharply, professional, composed, and not alone. Two elite Airways executives followed her down the aisle with quiet authority. Captain Hoffman, she said, her voice even but unmistakably cold. There will be no need for security. Mr. Reynolds is not being removed from this flight. Shock rippled across the captain's face. Ma'am, with respect, your decision, she cut in, has been overruled. She turned to Marcus and nodded with clarity and respect. Mr. Reynolds, on behalf of Elite Airways, I sincerely apologize for what you've experienced today. The conduct displayed by members of this crew is unacceptable and in direct violation of our values. Hoffman's expression morphed. Confusion, resistance, then realization. Ms. Chen, he said, trying to recover control. As captain, I'm responsible for this aircraft. Not anymore, said one of the executives beside her, his tone firm. You and your crew are being removed from duty, pending a full investigation. A replacement crew is already boarding. They'll complete this flight to San Francisco. The captain's face turned pale. He looked at Marcus, this time not as a problem to remove, but as someone he didn't understand. Who are you? He asked quietly. Marcus held his gaze. Years of being questioned, tested, underestimated, all leading to this moment. Someone who believed your airline could do better, he replied, and someone who still does. The cabin remained silent, not out of fear, but in awe. Hoffman stood frozen, his authority stripped away in full view of every passenger. Claire and Michael hovered at the galley, unsure whether to run or explain. Then Diane turned. Ms. Wilson, Mr. Barton, she called, her tone sharp but composed. Gather your belongings. Your credentials are suspended pending internal review. You are to deplane immediately. Claire's face went blank. Michael looked down. No one clapped. No one cheered. But justice, quiet, firm, and undeniable, had just been served at 35,000 feet. Claire stepped forward, her voice rising with indignation. This is ridiculous. We haven't done anything wrong. That passenger was being difficult. The captain made the call for everyone's safety. Diane Chen didn't raise her voice. She simply turned her tablet toward Claire, where footage from the cabin played silently on the screen. Miss Wilson, she said calmly, we have full audio and video documentation of every interaction that occurred on this flight, including those behind the galley curtain. I suggest you comply without further incident. Anything else will only escalate your current situation. Claire's face drained of color. Her eyes darted to the ceiling, where the discreet surveillance cameras were now impossible to unsee. You can't record us without telling us? That's an invasion of privacy. Diane didn't flinch. Page 17 of your employment contract. Page 4 of the crew handbook. All premium cabins are monitored for quality control and security. This policy went into effect 3 months ago. You attended the training. You signed off on it. Marcus watched the exchange with quiet composure, though his thoughts churned. He'd helped push that system into place, not as a trap, but as a shield, a last line of accountability, one he'd hoped would never be needed. Now, it had become the only thing ensuring the truth was undeniable. Captain Hoffman turned to Marcus, his facade finally cracking. You planned this, he said bitterly. Came on my plane looking for a fight, waiting for someone to slip. Marcus answered without hesitation. I boarded, expecting the same thing every passenger expects. Decent service and basic respect. Nothing more. What happened after that was a result of your choices. The captain's lips parted, but no words came. He turned sharply and strode down the aisle, posture stiff, authority shattered. Claire and Michael followed, casting last bitter glances toward Marcus. But the damage was done, and not to him. As the disgraced crew exited, a collective exhale passed through the cabin. Tension gave way to whispers. Phones came out. The story was already being written, and not by PR departments. Diane stepped closer, her voice lowered. "Mr. Reynolds, I want to personally apologize. This is a failure, on multiple levels, and it will be addressed." Marcus gave a slight nod. Her professionalism was clear, but this moment demanded more than apology. "Thank you, Diane. I know this isn't who the company wants to be, but clearly we've got deeper problems than we thought." "Agreed," she said, her expression grave. "The new crew will be on board shortly. Is there anything we can do for you?" Marcus paused. He looked around the cabin. Some passengers watched with sympathy. Others looked uncomfortable. A few still seemed irritated by the delay. And in that moment, Marcus made a choice. One that went beyond him. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'd like to address the passengers. Once the new crew is in place, everyone here was affected by this. They deserve clarity, not rumors." Diane nodded. "Understood. I'll arrange for you to speak once the new captain is briefed." As she moved to coordinate with ground staff, Marcus's phone buzzed again. A message from Jessica. "Board chairman wants to speak with you urgently. Media picking up chatter about Elite Airways diversion tied to discrimination. How do you want to handle it?" He typed back. "Tell him I'll call after we're airborne. No comment to press until I've addressed the passengers and reviewed the full record. Legal can prepare a statement. Clear, transparent, and honest. This isn't about PR. This is a moment for real change." Just as he hit send, a new alert lit up the screen. Breaking. Elite Airways faces backlash after unscheduled landing linked to discrimination claims. Full story developing. Marcus exhaled. The world was already watching. Now, it was time to make sure they heard the truth. The digital age doesn't allow injustice to stay at 30,000 feet. By the time this flight reached San Francisco, headlines would already be circulating. But before that, there was one more moment that mattered. Mr. Whitman leaned across the aisle again, his tone thoughtful. "Quite a turn of events," he said quietly. "I've flown this airline for 20 years. Never thought I'd see something like this." Marcus offered a faint smile. "Silent partner," he admitted. "I prefer to fly as a regular passenger. You learn things that quarterly reports never show." Whitman nodded. "Smart approach. Though I doubt this was the kind of insight you were hoping for." "No," Marcus replied, "but maybe it was the kind I needed. Some things don't show themselves until you feel them personally." Their conversation paused as the cabin door reopened. The replacement crew stepped aboard, led by a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and calm authority in every movement. She made her way straight to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sarah Lindstrom." Her voice rang clear, confident. "I understand this flight has encountered some unexpected challenges. My crew and I will be completing this journey to San Francisco. We expect to depart shortly. Thank you for your patience." A ripple of relief passed through the cabin. Some even clapped softly. Captain Lindstrom approached Marcus directly. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her handshake firm, "I want you to know that we're here to serve all passengers, equally and with respect." "I understand you'd like to address the cabin?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, if you're comfortable with that." "I think it's important," she agreed. "Just say when." As she returned to the flight deck, Diane approached with a clipboard. "These are the preliminary incident reports, based on the surveillance footage and passenger statements." Marcus skimmed the documents. The evidence was clear. Comments, decisions, actions, all recorded. Stripped of emotion, it read like a checklist of misconduct. But what the reports couldn't capture was the weight. The weight of the silence, the glances, the exhaustion of being told you don't belong, when all you asked for was what everyone else received without question. The flight crew finished preparations. Passengers resettled. Marcus stood, walked to the front of the cabin. Diane handed him the intercom. The moment had come, not to speak for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been quietly pushed aside and told it was nothing. The cabin fell still. Every eye turned toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice steady, filling the space without force. "My name is Marcus Reynolds. I'd like to take a moment to explain why your journey was interrupted and what really happened today." He scanned the cabin. Passengers in first class, in economy, flight delayed, plans disrupted, but now connected by truth. Some of you saw what happened. Others heard pieces. It started with a meal I had pre-ordered that never came. In its place, I was served spoiled food. That alone would have been upsetting. He paused, but what followed made it clear. This wasn't a mistake. I was treated differently, dismissed, mocked, and when I asked why, I was labeled disruptive. The result? This plane was diverted, not because of any safety risk, but because I had the audacity to ask for the same respect every other passenger received. A hush settled even deeper over the plane. I understand this delay has affected all of you. For that, I'm truly sorry. But what happened here happens in many places. Restaurants, offices, airports, stores. People are made to feel small, unwelcome, invisible, until someone says, "Enough." Some passengers nodded, others looked down, but they were all listening. We're not just passengers on a flight. We're part of a system, and that system doesn't change until people hold it accountable, not with outrage, but with truth. He paused again, then added quietly, "Today, I was that person, but tomorrow, it might be someone you love, or someone sitting next to you." He handed the intercom back to Diane, and in the silence that followed, there were no claps. Just thought, real, uncomfortable, necessary thought. "What the crew didn't know," Marcus continued, his tone calm but resolute, "is that I'm not just a passenger. I'm also a part owner of Elite Airways." Gasps, glances, full attention. 3 years ago, I made a substantial investment in this airline because I believed we could create something better, something built on dignity, safety, and respect for every passenger, no matter their background or appearance. He let that sink in. As part of that effort, I personally led the implementation of a cabin surveillance system across all premium cabins, not for discipline, but for accountability, service improvement, and safety. Now the tension shifted into realization. A few heads turned toward the ceiling panels, subtle but visible now that people knew where to look. "That system captured everything," Marcus said, "from the service denial to the private conversations, from the slurs whispered behind the curtain to the decision to declare a false emergency." A beat of silence. "The footage has already been reviewed by our legal and HR departments, and as a result, the crew responsible has been relieved of duty, effective immediately." The cabin was absolutely still. Then Marcus softened, his voice now laced with humility. "I know this delay disrupted your lives, your plans, your day, and for that, I sincerely apologize." He paused, choosing his next words with care. "To acknowledge the inconvenience and to show that Elite Airways takes this matter seriously, every passenger on this flight will receive a full refund of today's ticket, $10,000 in compensation, and 5 years of complimentary elite status." The silence broke. Audible gasps, murmurs, then a rising swell of applause, hesitant at first, then growing into a sustained, thunderous ovation. In economy, passengers who had been checking missed connections now stared forward in disbelief. In first class, several simply shook their heads in stunned silence. Marcus raised his hand slightly, signaling for calm. "This compensation," he said as the applause faded, "isn't just for today's delay. It's a statement That discrimination doesn't just hurt the person it targets, it shakes the entire system. When we stay silent in the face of injustice, we all pay the price. But when we confront it and correct it, we all move forward together. He handed the intercom back to Diane, who stepped in to explain how the compensation would be processed. Marcus returned to his seat, only now feeling the weight of the day. The adrenaline had faded. The exhaustion crept in. Passengers began lining up at his row, some offering handshakes, others simply saying thank you. A few shared personal stories. One young black woman leaned in and whispered, "Thank you, most of us can't afford to speak up like that." Her words hit harder than anything else. They reminded him that privilege is not just about money or status. It's about having the power to speak and the duty to use it. As passengers returned to their seats and the new crew prepared for takeoff, Mr. Whitman looked over with a quiet smile. "Quite a statement, Mr. Reynolds, with words and actions." Marcus gave a nod, glancing toward the window as Denver faded beneath them. "Some lessons," he said softly, "have to be expensive, to be remembered." $10,000 per passenger? Whitman raised a brow. "That's not just a lesson, that's a line in the sand." Marcus looked ahead. The money's not the point. It's that everyone on this plane is now part of the story, not just as witnesses, but as participants. They won't remember the slurs, they'll remember the response. Whitman considered that. "You're playing a longer game." "I have to," Marcus replied, "because this was never just about one flight, or one crew, or one airline. It's about the quiet ways we're told we don't belong, and the louder ways we learn to respond." The plane leveled out. The cabin resumed. Trays clinked. Beverages poured. The replacement crew moved with a kind of reverence, not out of fear, but purpose. Marcus opened his tablet. He began outlining the board presentation he'd deliver the next morning. The footage would show what happened, but he would explain why it happened, and how they would make sure it never happened again. His phone buzzed. The call from board chairman Robert Chen. Marcus answered. No hesitation, no anger, just clarity. "Marcus," Chen began, his voice urgent, "tell me what you need us to do." And for the first time in a long time, Marcus knew they were finally listening. "I've just reviewed the reports and footage," Chen said. "It's disturbing." "That's putting it mildly," Marcus answered, his voice low over the hum of the cabin. "The compensation package, it's significant," Chen added. "The board will ask questions." Marcus had expected that. "And I'll remind them," he said, "the cost of letting this culture continue, in lawsuits, in customer loss, in brand reputation, will be far greater. What we offered today, that's not a payout. That's an investment in our future." Silence followed on the line, the sound of a man recalibrating. "You've never been reckless, Marcus. I trust your judgment, but this will be national news by sunrise. That's why our response needs to be just as visible," Marcus said. "Tomorrow, I'll present a full reform proposal. New training standards, accountability protocols, hiring policy overhauls. It's time we stop saying, 'This isn't who we are,' and start proving it." "Some board members will push back," Chen warned. "They'll claim it was just one flight, one mistake." "Then I'll show them the data," Marcus replied, his voice sharpening. 17 complaints in premium cabins, most dismissed. That's not isolated. That's a system failing, by design. Chen exhaled, not in disagreement, but in recognition. "You've got my full support, Marcus. This isn't just the moral choice, it's the business one too. I'll see you at 8. As the call ended, Marcus looked around. Several passengers had just received bank notifications, audible gasps, surprise. The compensation was already processing. Diane had moved fast. It was a strong first step, but it was only the first. The flight continued smoothly. The replacement crew served each row with quiet precision. No bias, no tension, just excellence. The kind Marcus had envisioned when he joined this company in the first place. As the aircraft began its descent into San Francisco, Marcus finished the final notes on his tablet. Tomorrow's meeting wouldn't just decide his legacy, It would decide the airline's future. Block 7, the aftermath begins. At the terminal, Elite Airways' executive response team was already waiting. The tension in their faces said it all. James Peterson, COO, stepped forward. "Marcus, I saw the footage. It's inexcusable." "Yes," Marcus replied. "And now we make sure it never happens again." Inside the executive suite, monitors displayed live data, social media, customer feedback, media coverage. A young analyst gestured to one screen. "There's a measurable drop in satisfaction among passengers of color in premium cabins, particularly on flights staffed by a specific rotation." "And how many of those triggered internal reviews?" Marcus asked. Diane stepped in. "Very few. Our current system flags only when multiple reports are filed against the same employee within a short window. Or," Marcus said quietly, "it was designed not to see those patterns." James looked away, wincing. "The surveillance system you pushed for, it showed us things we didn't want to see." "Didn't want to," Marcus echoed, "or didn't value enough to look for." He paused. "It's time we value accountability more than optics. I've already ordered a 5-year audit," Diane added. "Every discrimination complaint, even those dismissed at intake, will be reviewed." A screen flashed. Statements from Claire and Captain Hoffman appeared, full of vague denials and deflection, painting Marcus as the aggressor. The legal director approached with a tablet. "The compensation package is everywhere. Headlines call it a $10 million event. The board will demand explanation. They can question the cost of action," Marcus said, "or face the cost of silence." He stepped away, calling Jessica. "Backups of the footage. Confirmed?" "Triple secure," she replied, "on servers, legal system, and your private drive." "Good, because tomorrow the real work starts. Not just an incident, a reckoning." As he ended the call, a notification from Chen appeared on his screen. "Media requests flooding in, interviews, statements, your call." Marcus thought for a moment, then typed, "No interviews yet. Issue a formal statement. We acknowledge the incident. We've taken immediate action. A full reform package will be announced tomorrow. This isn't about image, it's about systemic change." As he set the device down, a black executive quietly approached. "I've been with this airline 20 years, she said softly. "What happened to you? It's happened to people like me again and again, but we didn't have the position to speak up." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "Thank you for using yours." Marcus nodded. "Because the real flight was just beginning. This isn't just my fight," Marcus told her, "and the changes we make can't just protect people like me in first class." Diane nodded. "The board won't make it easy. Some will want to contain the fallout instead of fixing the cause. Then we'll make the evidence impossible to ignore," Marcus said. "Tomorrow isn't about one flight. It's about exposing a reality that's been hidden in plain sight for far too long." At Elite Airways Command Center, screens displayed live media coverage, customer sentiment, and internal audit data. The reckoning had begun, and it should never have taken this much for it to happen. "James," Marcus called, "I want full service histories for every crew member linked to discrimination complaints in the past 5 years. Who reviewed those cases, what actions were taken. Every file." "That's hundreds of reports," James replied. "Then we'd better get started," Marcus said, "because tomorrow the board sees all of it." The next morning, the boardroom was silent as the final clip from Flight 347 played on the screen. A flight attendant's contempt, a captain's false claim of emergency, and words behind the galley curtain no company could defend. "What you saw," Marcus began, "wasn't isolated. It was cultural, structural, and long ignored." He cited 78 prior complaints, dismissed, ignored, misclassified. The numbers weren't just data, they were people. Some board members resisted. $10 million in compensation? One asked. It was bad service, not physical harm. It wasn't bad service, Marcus said. It was discrimination made policy by inaction, and it endangered every person on that flight. Others pushed back on the cost of reform, but Marcus pointed at the wall of headlines on the command center's live feed. Smartphones are everywhere. The next failure won't stay quiet. We either lead change now or get dragged into it later on far worse terms. After hours of debate, the board voted 11-3 in favor of the full reform package. 6 months later, Marcus sat again in seat 2A, but everything had changed. The cabin had been updated, the crew had been retrained, and Sarah Johnson, now the permanent lead attendant, approached with warmth, not performance. "Your Macallan 18 is ready, Mr. Reynolds. Anything else before takeoff?" "Just the usual towel," Marcus smiled, nothing more. She placed an envelope on his tray. From the crew. Inside, a handwritten note signed by each staff member. "Your courage changed our airline, and others. You turned a painful moment into a movement. Thank you for raising the standard for everyone." Marcus tucked the note into his pocket, silently acknowledging the quiet cost of change. He thought of Claire, Michael, and Hoffman. Their appeals had failed. Their dismissals stood. The FAA had even suspended Hoffman's license for abusing emergency protocol. But the real impact wasn't disciplinary. It was structural. 3 other major carriers had adopted Elite's reforms. Surveillance and complaint systems had been rebuilt. The culture of silence had cracked, replaced by one of accountability. As the aircraft taxied, Marcus opened his tablet. Despite early fears, bookings were up. Public trust had grown, not fallen. Passengers, it turned out, weren't afraid of truth. They were waiting for companies brave enough to face it. Captain Lisa Hernandez's voice came over the intercom. "Welcome aboard Flight 347 to San Francisco." 6 months ago, Marcus had been seen as an intruder in that seat. Today he was just a passenger. No labels, no suspicion, no performance. Just a traveler, seen, respected, and finally, welcome.